Hey Naveh, wanted to make a quick video to help you out with Y12 since you're way ahead of us and we haven't really talked about this as a class. The goal for Y12, as you see the title, is convert a linear equation that's in standard form to slope-intercept form. So not every linear equation needs to be written in the y equals mx plus b form that we've worked on. It's nice when they are, it's easy to graph them, it's easy to read the slope and the y-intercept, but a lot of times when we build equations in the real world, they don't start off in that nice y equals mx plus b formula we've looked at. And so if they're asking you to rewrite the equations in slope-intercept form, what that really means at the end of the day is they're asking us to solve for y. That's really what they're asking here. Because if we get the y solved, if we get the y all by itself on one side of the equation, then we'll see that it's in the y equals mx plus b form we want. So I'm going to I took this equation and I put it on my whiteboard. You're going to need to be writing stuff out too at this point, I think. And we're going to take through the process of how do we solve this equation for the y? How do we get y all by itself? So if we're solving for y, if we want to isolate the y, the first thing we need to do, I drew this line through the equation, what I call the river, and that helps me focus, okay, what is on the left side with the y? And the first thing I want to get rid of is the 16x here. That's a positive term, and anytime I want to get rid of a positive term, the inverse operation that cancels it out is a negative, or a subtraction. If I had 16x's and I took 16x's away, that would leave us with no x's at all. They'd be gone. But the rule, as you remember from Mr. Neville last year, I'm only allowed to change the left side by subtracting 16x if I do the same exact subtraction of 16x on the right side of the equation. And what we see over here is that these are not like terms. I don't know if Mr. Neville still uses the idea of same last name, but this is a regular number, a constant, and this is an x term. They're not like terms, they can't be combined, so all we can do is kind of write them next to each other. The right side of the equation becomes 3 minus 16x. And now the big goal we wanted, the left side, is just down to negative 3y. So we're not in slope-intercept form yet, but we're close. We need to get rid of this negative 3 that is multiplied with the y. And as you may recall from last year, the opposite of multiplication, or the inverse operation that cancels out multiply, is to divide. And I'm going to use a fraction to show division. You could write a division sign, but I think it's easier to just use the fraction to show divide. And anything I do to one side of the equation, I'm required to do the same operation to the other side. So when I divide by negative 3 here, that cancels out the multiplication of negative 3. A negative divided by a negative cancels out. 3 divided by 3 just becomes 1. And that's what gets us down to y on this side of the equation. But we needed to remember to divide both sides of the equation by negative 3. And that means every term, the 3 and the negative 16x, both need to be divided by a negative 3. 3 divided by negative 3 would be negative 1. And this is what's difficult. Negative 16x divided by negative 3. A negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive. So the slope's going to be positive. And 16 divided by 3 does not simplify. I can't believe IXL makes some of these this difficult in the beginning. But that's just a negative divided by a negative becomes a positive. And since 16 divided by 3 can't be simplified, I just leave it as a fraction, 16 over 3x. Now, it kind of ended up being a little backwards here. You could flip these terms. That's what I'm going to do right now, actually. I'm going to take that in black here as the correct answer, and I'm just going to pull the mx term up front. So it says y equals 16 over 3x, and then the y-intercept, the negative 1, I'm going to write in the plus b spot. So I know it definitely looks like a lot at first, but recapping what we did, we had an equation that was not in y equals form. It wasn't in that slope-intercept form. So we used a couple steps. We first got rid of the 16x by doing the opposite, by subtracting that. That got the negative 3y isolated or all by itself, but we needed to cancel out the multiply by negative 3, and we used a divide by negative 3. That got complicated on the right side of the equation because there were two terms, the 3 and the negative 16x, which we could not combine. And 3 divided by negative 3 gave us this negative 1. The negative 16x term, or the minus 16x term, also had to be divided by the negative 3, and the negative divided by a negative created a positive, and again 16 over 3 could not be simplified. Then at the end, I think you're comfortable with this, we just flop the mx and the b terms. I'm going to take a look, we'll see if that's correct. Sorry, that took a second. All right. And we'll go ahead and plug in y equals 16 over 3x minus 1 for the y-intercept. And it looks like they're going to be ridiculous for all of these, where they're going to keep making things that don't divide that evenly either. I'm going to pop around to one that looks a little different than the one we just did. Oh, great, one in the challenge zone. But it looks like for this assignment, they start off very difficult, so they aren't really that much tougher on the challenge zone. So we'll show this one example too. The equation here, the whole assignment for Y12 will be switching these equations into slope-intercept form, or converting them, as they say. So you'll be taking negative 6x plus 8y, which is supposed to be equal to negative 12, and we're going to need to convert that into slope-intercept form. So, sorry for the wait, but now that's on the whiteboard, we'll put this kind of full screen. Taking a look at that equation, negative 6x plus 8y equals negative 12. Again, I'm going to draw the river, or the line through the equation, to help my brain focus on what's on the left side of the equation, what's gathered on the right side. I see that the 8y term is over here on the left side, so the first thing I want to do is I don't want the negative 6x over here with the y term. I want to get rid of that negative 6x. And the opposite of subtracting, or a negative term, is to add, or to put a positive term there. Because a positive 6x and a negative 6x, 6 minus 6 leaves us with no x's at all. That's how I'm canceling that out, or isolating the y term. But the only way I'm allowed to add 6x on the left side of the equation is if I do the same exact thing to the right side of the equation. So I'll put the plus 6x on both sides of our equation here. And now this got the 8y isolated. It has the y term now all by itself, and it was a positive term, so I don't need that plus sign here. And over here on the right side of the equation, these are not like terms. The negative 12 and the positive 6x cannot be combined because one of them is a constant, a regular number. The other is a variable term, an x term, that can't be combined with the constants. So all I get is 6x minus 12. Now we're closer to slope-intercept form. We do have the y term all by itself, but for slope-intercept form it has to be 1y. We can't have a coefficient other than 1. So the opposite of multiplying by 8, every time we have a multiplication or a coefficient with y, to cancel it out we use division. Division is the opposite, or the inverse, of multiplication. 8 divided by 8 just makes 1. So again, we divided by 8 to cancel out the multiplication, and that left us with 1y, or what I'm going to just write as y. The right side of the equation also needed to divide by 8. And so we get 6x divided by 8. That's a positive term divided by a positive, so I'm going to call that 6 over 8x. And then negative 12 over 8. And that's also not going to perfectly divide to a whole number, so for now I'm just going to write it as negative 12 divided by 8. So this is our equation. IXL is specific. I think they always demand that you simplify, and we have some fractions that can't go to whole numbers, but they can at least simplify to a smaller, simpler fraction. So y equals 6 over 8x. I'm going to convert that right now. 6 over 8 is equivalent or the same thing as 3 over 4. It's a simpler way to say 6 over 8. And 12 over 8, these are both divisible by 4. So I actually know 12 divided by 8, if I divide them both by 4, 12 over 8 is really the same thing as 3/2. I'm going to need a subtraction sign there still, because we were subtracting 12 over 8, so we're still going to be subtracting 3/2, which is equivalent to 12 over 8, just written in a simpler way. So that's the final equation we would need there. This is definitely challenging stuff. So whether it's Nevaeh or somebody else who's catching up to us on Y12 and wants to work on this, just send me an email, and I'm happy to work through a couple of these because that might make a bit more sense for you. So our equation again, y equals 3 over 4x minus 3/2. And thanks for really getting ahead of us, pushing yourself, and thanks for checking out this video.